The crack of a shotgun echoed through the dusty air of Promise Creek, Montana, as Katherine Jennings flinched at the sound, her trembling hands dropping the basket of eggs she'd collected. It was 1878, and at 22 years old, she had become accustomed to her brother's volatile temperament, but today seemed worse than usual. 3 eggs had survived the fall, but the rest lay shattered on the packed dirt of the farmyard, their golden yolks seeping into the thirsty earth. Useless, completely useless, Thomas Jennings growled, lowering his shotgun after shooting at a coyote that had been prowling near their chicken coop. Just like everything else you touch. He stood tall and imposing in the doorway of their modest farmhouse, his face twisted with disgust as he observed the mess at Katherine's feet. "I'm sorry, Thomas," Katherine murmured, kneeling to salvage what she could. "The shot startled me." "Everything startles you," he sneered, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Pa left me this farm and the burden of you. 4 years I've been trying to marry you off, and not a single man in Promise Creek wants to take you. Can't even hold a basket of eggs without making a mess." Katherine kept her eyes downcast, knowing that looking directly at her brother when he was in one of his moods would only intensify his anger. Since their parents had died of influenza 4 years ago, Thomas had become increasingly bitter, blaming her for every hardship they faced. The drought that had killed half their crops last season was somehow her fault. The broken wagon wheel last month was due to her bad luck. Even the fact that she remained unmarried at 22 was a personal failing, according to Thomas. "Get inside and clean yourself up," he ordered. "The Wilsons are coming for supper, and I won't have you embarrassing me. Maybe their oldest boy might take pity on you, though I doubt it." Katherine gathered the surviving eggs and hurried inside, her blue calico dress stained with yellow splotches. Another matchmaking attempt. Another evening of being displayed like damaged goods at a general store. She sighed as she washed her hands in the basin, the cool water soothing against her skin. The Wilson family wasn't due for another 3 hours, which gave Katherine time to prepare the meal and make herself presentable. She worked methodically, finding comfort in the familiar tasks of cooking and cleaning. The routine helped keep her mind from wandering to darker thoughts, like how her life had become a prison of her brother's making. As she was setting the table, she heard the sound of hooves approaching. Thomas had mentioned he might stop by the saloon before the Wilsons arrived, so Katherine thought nothing of it until she heard an unfamiliar voice call out a greeting. Curious, she moved to the window. A tall man dismounted from a magnificent chestnut horse. His broad shoulders were outlined against the setting sun, and even from a distance, Katherine could tell he carried himself with confidence. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. This wasn't anyone from Promise Creek that she recognized. The door opened, and Thomas stepped inside, followed by the stranger. "Katherine," Thomas called, his voice carrying an unusual note of respect that only emerged when he was trying to impress someone. "Come meet Mr. Nathan Kane. He's buying up land for cattle grazing, and I've invited him to stay for supper." Katherine smoothed her apron and stepped into the main room, keeping her eyes modestly lowered as she'd been taught. "Miss Jennings," the stranger said, his voice deep and warm like summer honey. "It's a pleasure to meet you." When she finally looked up, Katherine found herself meeting the most intense pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. Nathan Kane studied her with open curiosity, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Unlike most men who visited, he didn't look through her or past her, he looked at her, truly saw her. "Mr. Kane," she managed, offering a small curtsy. "Welcome to our home." "Nathan's looking to establish a cattle operation," Thomas explained, pouring whiskey for himself and their guest. "He's got backing from some big investors in Chicago, says our land would be perfect for what he has in mind." Katherine's heart sank. Thomas had been talking about selling the farm for months, despite it being their family legacy. The drought had hit them hard, and with Thomas spending more time at the saloon than working the fields, their finances were dire. "I hope you'll join us for the meal, Mr. Kane," Katherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The Wilsons will be arriving shortly as well." "I'm afraid I've imposed enough," Nathan replied. "I should find accommodations in town." "Nonsense," Thomas insisted. "We've got plenty of room. Besides, I want to hear more about your offer." As Katherine returned to the kitchen to finish preparing the meal, she could hear the men discussing prices and acreage. Thomas's voice grew louder with each glass of whiskey, while Nathan's remained measured and thoughtful. The Wilsons arrived promptly at 6 Herbert and Martha Wilson, along with their son Jeremiah, a dour-faced young man with thinning hair despite being only 25. Katherine had met him several times at church socials, and he had never shown the slightest interest in her, which made her wonder why Thomas had invited them. Dinner was a tense affair. Thomas dominated the conversation, boasting about the farm's potential while glossing over its current struggles. The Wilsons contributed occasional comments, mostly about the drought and how their own farm was faring slightly better due to Jeremiah's innovative techniques. Nathan said little, but Katherine noticed his eyes frequently returning to her. Not in the leering way some men looked at women, but with a quiet intensity that made her both nervous and intrigued. When Katherine brought out the apple pie for dessert, Thomas suddenly announced, "Jeremiah here is looking for a wife, and I've told him Katherine would make a fine one. She's a decent cook, and though she's clumsy and a bit dull, she knows how to keep a house." The room fell silent. Katherine stood frozen, the pie trembling slightly in her hands. She'd endured many humiliations at her brother's hands, but this public auction of her virtues and flaws struck deeper than most. "Is that so?" Nathan asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "And does Miss Jennings have any say in this arrangement?" Thomas waved dismissively. "Women don't know what's good for them. Katherine's getting on in years. She should be grateful anyone would have her." "I find that difficult to believe," Nathan said, standing from his chair. He looked directly at Katherine, his blue eyes intense. "Miss Jennings strikes me as an intelligent and capable woman. Any man would be fortunate to have her companionship." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. No one had ever defended her against Thomas before. "You don't know her like I do," Thomas scoffed. "She's been nothing but a burden since our parents died. Can't even hold a basket of eggs without dropping it." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Perhaps the problem isn't with the hands that hold the basket, but with the person who startles them." An uncomfortable silence descended on the table. The Wilsons shifted awkwardly in their chairs while Thomas's face darkened with anger. "I think we should be going," Herbert Wilson said, rising to his feet. "Martha's not feeling well." Martha Wilson, who had shown no signs of illness until that moment, nodded vigorously. "Yes, a terrible headache. Thank you for the lovely meal, Katherine." As the Wilsons hastily departed, Thomas turned his fury on Nathan. "Who do you think you are, coming into my home and embarrassing me like that?" Nathan remained calm. "I'm a man who recognizes value where others see only flaws." He turned to Katherine. "The pie looks delicious, Miss Jennings. May I have a slice?" The tension in the room was palpable as Katherine served the pie, her hands shaking slightly. Thomas drained his whiskey glass and poured another, his mood growing darker with each sip. "I think I'll turn in early," Katherine said after clearing the dessert plates. "It was nice meeting you, Mr. Kane." Nathan stood politely as she excused herself. "The pleasure was mine, Miss Jennings." Later that night, Katherine lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the muffled voices of the men still talking in the main room. Thomas's voice had grown louder and more slurred, while Nathan's remained steady and controlled. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone suggested their discussion had moved beyond land transactions. Just as she was finally drifting off to sleep, a crash jolted her fully awake. She threw on her robe and hurried to the main room to find Thomas sprawled on the floor, a broken chair beneath him. Nathan stood a few feet away, his stance wary but not aggressive. "What happened?" Katherine gasped. "Your brother took exception to some of my opinions," Nathan explained calmly. He attempted to throw a punch and lost his balance. Thomas struggled to his feet, his face flushed with drink and rage. "Get out of my house," he slurred, pointing a shaking finger at Nathan. "Deal's off." "That's your choice," Nathan replied, "but my offer stands." He turned to Katherine. "Both of my offers." Katherine didn't understand what he meant, but Thomas apparently did. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm roughly. "She's not going anywhere with you. She's my responsibility, my burden." "She's a woman, not a piece of property," Nathan countered, his voice hardening. "And certainly not a burden," Thomas laughed bitterly. "Shows what you know. She's useless, completely useless, can't even attract a husband without my help." Nathan's eyes never left Katherine's. "She's not useless, not to me. In fact, she might just be my whole world." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. They had barely spoken a dozen sentences to each other, yet something in his eyes told her he meant every word. "What are you saying?" Thomas demanded. "I'm saying I'd like to court your sister properly," Nathan replied. "With her permission, of course." Before Katherine could respond, Thomas shoved her aside. "Get out, both of you, you want her. Take her and all her worthlessness with you." Nathan stepped forward, placing himself between Katherine and her brother. "Miss Jennings, would you like to leave with me? I have rooms at the hotel in town." "You'd have your own space, of course, and my complete respect." Katherine hesitated, her mind racing. To leave with a man she barely knew versus staying with the brother who had made her life miserable for years. It wasn't really a choice at all. "I need to gather some things," she said softly. Thomas stared at her in disbelief. "You're actually going, after all I've done for you?" Katherine disappeared into her room before he could say more. With trembling hands, she packed a small carpet bag with her most essential belongings, a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, a daguerreotype of her parents, and the small book of poetry her father had given her on her 16th birthday. When she returned to the main room, Nathan was waiting by the door, his expression somber but determined. Thomas had collapsed in a chair, another glass of whiskey in his hand. "You'll be back," Thomas sneered, "when he gets tired of you, just like everyone else does." Katherine paused at the threshold, looking back at the home that had once been filled with love before grief and bitterness had poisoned it. "Goodbye, Thomas." The night air was cool against her skin as Nathan helped her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, his arms encircling her waist as he took the reins. Katherine had never been this close to a man before, and despite the impropriety of the situation, she felt strangely safe. They rode in silence toward Promise Creek, the rhythm of the horses' hooves the only sound in the darkness. Katherine's mind whirled with questions and uncertainties. Had she made a terrible mistake? What did Nathan want from her? What would the townspeople say? "I meant what I said back there," Nathan said finally, his voice close to her ear. "You're not useless, Katherine, not even close." "You don't know me," she replied, her voice barely audible above the horse's steady gait. "I'd like to," he said simply, "if you'll give me the chance." The lights of Promise Creek appeared in the distance, and Katherine felt a curious mixture of trepidation and hope. For the first time in 4 years, she was making a choice for herself. Whatever happened next, at least it would be of her own doing. The Golden Nugget Hotel was the finest establishment in Promise Creek, which wasn't saying much for a town of barely 500 souls. Still, it was clean and respectable, and the proprietress, Mrs. Alina Winters, was known for her strict adherence to propriety. Nathan helped Katherine dismount and led her inside, where Mrs. Winters was still awake despite the late hour, knitting by the light of an oil lamp. "Mr. Kane," she greeted, her eyebrows rising at the sight of Katherine. "Miss Jennings, this is unexpected." "Miss Jennings needs accommodations for the night," Nathan explained. "A separate room from mine, of course." Mrs. Winters set aside her knitting and regarded them thoughtfully. "I have one room available, but I must say, this arrangement seems highly irregular." "Miss Jennings had to leave her brother's home rather suddenly," Nathan said, his tone making it clear he wouldn't elaborate further. "I've offered my assistance as a gentleman." "I see." Mrs. Winters turned her attention to Katherine. Is this true, my dear? Are you here of your own free will? Katherine nodded. Yes, Mrs. Winters, Mr. Kane has been very kind. The older woman studied them for a moment longer, then sighed. Very well, but I'll have no impropriety under my roof, understood? Absolutely, Nathan agreed. Mrs. Winters led them upstairs, showing Katherine to a small but comfortable room at the end of the hallway, far from Nathan's. Breakfast is served at 7, she informed them. And I expect both of you at the table, looking respectable and ready to explain this situation to anyone who asks. After Mrs. Winters departed, Katherine stood awkwardly in the doorway, her carpetbag clutched in her hands. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. Nathan smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. You don't need to thank me. Get some rest, Katherine. We'll talk more in the morning. As he turned to leave, Katherine called after him. Why did you do it? Why did you say those things to Thomas? Nathan paused, considering his words carefully. Because I recognized something in you the moment we met, a quiet strength that your brother has tried to break. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. He tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Jennings. Alone in her room, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, her mind still processing the dramatic turn her life had taken in a single evening. She had left behind everything familiar, however unpleasant, for the unknown. Part of her wanted to panic, but another part, a part that had been dormant for too long, felt exhilarated by the change. Morning came with golden sunlight streaming through the lace curtains. Katherine, dressed in her best dress, a simple blue calico that had seen better days, but was at least clean and presentable. She pinned her hair carefully, trying to look as respectable as possible for whatever awaited her downstairs. Nathan was already seated at the breakfast table when she arrived, engaged in conversation with Mrs. Winters. He rose when he saw her, pulling out a chair. Good morning, Katherine. I hope you slept well. I did, thank you, she replied, accepting the seat. Mrs. Winters poured coffee for both of them. Mr. Kane has been explaining your situation to me, Miss Jennings. I'm sorry to hear about your difficulties with your brother. Katherine's cheeks flushed. It's complicated. Family always is, Mrs. Winters said with a sympathetic nod. But Mr. Kane assures me his intentions are honorable, and I've known him long enough to take him at his word. Katherine glanced at Nathan in surprise. You've stayed here before? Several times over the past few years, he confirmed. Promise Creek is on my regular circuit when I'm scouting land for investors. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Reverend Phillips, the town's Presbyterian minister. He entered the dining room with purposeful strides, his expression grave. Miss Jennings, he said, nodding stiffly. Your brother came to see me this morning. He's quite concerned about your situation. Katherine's stomach twisted with anxiety. Of course Thomas would try to cause trouble. He wouldn't simply let her go. Reverend Phillips, Nathan greeted, standing to shake the minister's hand. Please join us. I believe there's been some misunderstanding. The Reverend hesitated, then took a seat. Thomas Jennings claims you've stolen his sister away in the night, Mr. Kane. He's threatening to involve the sheriff. I didn't steal anyone, Nathan replied calmly. Miss Jennings left of her own accord after her brother explicitly told her to go. Is this true? Reverend Phillips asked Katherine. She nodded, finding her voice. Yes, Reverend, my brother was upset. He told Mr. Kane to take me and all my worthlessness with him. The memory still stung, but speaking the words aloud somehow diminished their power. The Reverend's expression softened. I see, Thomas has been troubled since your parents' passing. The drink hasn't helped matters. He turned to Nathan. Still, Mr. Kane, you must understand how this appears. An unmarried woman leaving with a man in the night. Which is why I brought her directly to Mrs. Winters' establishment, Nathan interjected. And why I've arranged for Miss Jennings to stay with Mrs. Langford, the milliner, starting today. Katherine looked at him in surprise. This was the first she'd heard of such an arrangement. Mrs. Langford has been looking for help in her shop, Nathan explained to her. I spoke with her early this morning. She's happy to provide you with room and board in exchange for your assistance if that suits you. That would be, Ideal, Katherine said, amazed at his thoughtfulness. Working for Mrs. Langford would give her independence and a respectable position in the community. Reverend Phillips seemed appeased. That's a sensible solution. Mrs. Langford is a fine Christian woman. He stood, preparing to leave. I'll speak with Thomas, try to calm his concerns. Thank you, Reverend, Katherine said gratefully. After the Reverend departed, Mrs. Winters excused herself to tend to other guests, leaving Katherine and Nathan alone at the table. You arranged all that this morning? Katherine asked, still processing the rapid changes in her circumstances. Nathan smiled. I rise early, and Promise Creek is a small town news travels fast, especially when it involves Mrs. Winters's establishments. Mrs. Langford was having breakfast when I came down. The conversation flowed naturally from there. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to, he replied simply. You deserve the chance to build a life on your own terms, Katherine. She studied him across the table, this man who had upended her world in the space of a night. What happens now, with us I mean, Nathan's expression grew serious. That depends entirely on you. I meant what I said about courting you properly, but only if that's what you want. I won't pressure you. Katherine considered his words. The practical part of her said it was too soon, that she barely knew this man. But another part recognized something rare and genuine in Nathan Kane. I think I'd like that, she said finally. The courting, I mean, but slowly. His smile could have lit up the darkest night. Slowly it is then. The following weeks brought more changes than Katherine had experienced in the previous 4 years combined. Working at Mrs. Langford's millinery shop proved to be a revelation. She discovered a natural talent for design and decoration that Mrs. Langford enthusiastically encouraged. For the first time in her life, someone valued her contributions and praised her abilities. Nathan called on her regularly, always respectful of the boundaries they'd established. Sometimes they simply walked through town together or sat on the bench outside the general store, talking about everything and nothing. Other times, he would bring her small, thoughtful gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry similar to the one her father had given her, wildflowers gathered from the prairie. Thomas made no further attempts to interfere, though Katherine occasionally saw him watching her from across the street when she was out with Nathan. His expression was always unreadable, a mixture of anger and something that might have been regret. One sunny afternoon in late June, Nathan invited Katherine for a picnic by Promise Creek, the waterway that had given the town its name. Mrs. Langford, who had become something of a surrogate mother to Katherine, insisted on chaperoning from a discreet distance, settling herself under a tree with her knitting while the couple spread their blanket closer to the water. I have news, Nathan said as they unpacked the basket of food Mrs. Winters had prepared for them. I've purchased land just outside of town. Katherine looked up in surprise. You're staying in Promise Creek, he nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. I've been traveling for years, Katherine. Buying land for other men, helping them build their dreams. It's time I built something for myself. What will you build? She asked, her heart beating faster at the implications of his decision. A ranch, he replied. Nothing too grand at first, but there's good grazing land and plenty of water. I've already ordered lumber for a house. Katherine tried to keep her expression neutral, though hope blossomed in her chest. That sounds wonderful. Nathan took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I'm hoping it will be a home, Katherine, not just a house. Nathan. I know it's only been a few weeks, he said quickly. And I promised we'd take things slowly, but I need you to know that my feelings for you have only grown stronger with each passing day. Katherine looked down at their joined hands, his tanned and calloused from years of hard work, hers paler but gaining strength from her new independence. Mine too, she admitted softly. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Then perhaps when the house is finished, you might consider becoming Mrs. Nathan Kane, Katherine's breath caught in her throat. Despite the growing closeness between them, she hadn't expected a proposal so soon. Are you certain? What about all my flaws, my worthlessness? She tried to keep her tone light, but years of Thomas's criticism had left deeper wounds than she cared to admit. Nathan's expression grew serious. "Katherine Jennings, listen to me carefully. You are the most valuable person I've ever met. Your kindness, your resilience, your quiet strength, these aren't flaws, they're treasures, and anyone who can't see that is the one who's truly blind." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. "I want to believe that." "Then believe this," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and emptied its contents into his palm, a delicate gold ring with a single pearl. "This was my mother's. She made me promise I would only give it to a woman who captured my heart completely." He held it out to her. "You've done that, Katherine. You are my whole world." Katherine stared at the ring, her vision blurring with tears. The words he'd spoken that night at the farm echoed in her memory. He had meant them even then, somehow seeing in her what no one else had bothered to look for. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength as she repeated, "Yes, Nathan Kane, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then leaned forward to place a chaste kiss on her lips, mindful of Mrs. Langford's watchful presence nearby. The older woman pretended not to notice, though her knitting needles clicked more rapidly, and a smile played at the corners of her mouth. The wedding took place in late September, after the completion of the modest but sturdy ranch house Nathan had built. The entire town of Promise Creek turned out for the ceremony, with Reverend Phillips officiating. Even Thomas made an appearance, standing at the back of the church, sober for the first time in months. He didn't speak to Katherine directly, but he nodded to her as she passed in her wedding gown, a simple white dress that she and Mrs. Langford had worked on together. As Nathan and Katherine exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days, Katherine felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since before her parents' deaths. Life wouldn't always be easy. The West was still wild and unpredictable, but she would face whatever came with a partner who valued her, who saw her worth. The years that followed proved Katherine right. The Kane Ranch prospered under their joint care, with Nathan handling the cattle and Katherine managing the household and gardens. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. When their first child, a daughter named Elizabeth, arrived a year after their wedding, Katherine discovered new depths to Nathan's tenderness as he cradled their infant with infinite care. Thomas eventually left Promise Creek, heading further west to California in search of gold or fortune. Before he departed, he stopped by the Kane Ranch, awkward and uncertain. "You look well," he told Katherine, his eyes taking in her neat home and the baby on her hip. "Happy." "I am," she replied simply. Thomas nodded, unable to meet her gaze directly. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About you." "About a lot of things." It wasn't quite an apology, but coming from Thomas, it was significant. Katherine shifted Elizabeth to her other hip. "Would you like to meet your niece?" That visit marked a tentative reconciliation between the siblings. Thomas wrote occasionally from California, his letters growing less bitter with time. He never returned to Promise Creek, but Katherine felt the healing of that old wound nonetheless. By their 5th wedding anniversary, the Kane Ranch had expanded to include a larger herd of cattle, several horses, and a thriving vegetable garden that produced enough for their family with surplus to share with neighbors. Their family had grown as well, with the addition of twin boys, James and Joseph, who had their father's blue eyes and their mother's gentle spirit. On the evening of their anniversary, after the children were asleep, Nathan and Katherine sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the vast Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Coming away with me that night," Katherine leaned into his embrace, secure in the life they had built together. "Not for a single moment." Nathan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Do you remember what I said to your brother that night?" "You said I might be your whole world," Katherine recalled with a smile. "I was wrong," Nathan admitted, turning to face her fully. You're not just my whole world, Katherine Kane. You, our children, this life we've created together, you're my entire universe. And I thank God every day that I found you." As the last light of day faded from the sky and the first stars appeared overhead, Katherine tilted her face up to her husband's. In his eyes, she saw the same wonder and devotion that had been there from the beginning, a love that had never wavered. "And I thank God every day that you saw me," she whispered against his lips. "Truly saw me when everyone else looked away." Their kiss was a promise renewed, a testament to the journey that had begun with a shotgun blast and a broken basket of eggs, and had led to this moment of perfect contentment beneath the vast Montana sky. In the gentle night breeze that rustled through the cottonwood trees surrounding their home, Katherine thought she could hear the whisper of destiny fulfilled. The girl who had once been told she was worthless had found her value in the eyes of a man who had recognized her true worth from the very beginning. And together, they had created a life richer than either could have imagined alone.